Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodian of the land on which we live today. I pay my respect to their elder, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also pay my respect to all the fallen heroes from Spring Revolution in Myanmar, and at last not the least, to all our panel and participants from different parts of the world to join the AMI seminar today. Okay, Chris, the floor is yours.
As I was saying just before we began, Janelle Saffin is unable to be with us, which is very unfortunate, but we got the notice late. She's a member of the New South Wales Parliament, and she's in Lismore, her hometown and her constituency in the Parliament. And the leader of her party is in Lismore now and has organised a meeting that she has to attend. So that's just unfortunate. But you see, Tun, this is the sort of thing that happens when you have parliamentary democracy. It doesn't happen so often when you have autocratic rule. There we are. So we're here to hear from Tun Aung Shwe about the NUG office, its setup and its activities and its plans. And he will speak for about 15 minutes. And then I will speak on Janelle's part, not for as long as Janelle would have spoken. And then Lisa will speak about the priorities for youth in Myanmar and in Australia. And she's from Victoria and Myanmar Youth. So Tun, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all for joining with us this evening. First of all, I would like to thank AMI for giving this great opportunity. So I'm going to present some slides for the topic NUG representation in Australia. So before I talk about the NUG office functions, duties, and responsibility, I would like to introduce you about NUG and then the what, why, and how NUG is going. So as you all know, NUG is an interim government. And I would like to say the government has both de jure and de facto legitimacy because NUG was formed on 16 April and announced by CRPH. So CRPH is a group of parliamentarians elected in the 2020 election, and then their colleagues endorsed them to carry out the duties of the legislature when the normal federal parliaments not able to commence due to the military coup. And also when NUG was formed, the key body is NUCC, National Unity Consultative Council, which is very inclusive and composed of elected MPs, political parties, CSOs, EROs, and then the interim representative committee and special observers. So that is why the NUG government, NUG has NUG cabinet members are with various backgrounds. Some are from the EROs, some are from the political parties, some are youth organizations. So that is why I would like to say NUG has both de jure and the de facto legitimacy. So regarding duties and mandates of NUG, that is based on the Federal Democracy Charter, which is prepared and published by NUCC. And then this charter highlighted the political roadmap and objectives and political goal of the NUG. So this 12-step political roadmap is the how NUG is running to achieve its goal to form the Federal Democracy Constitution and Federal Democratic Union. So for the moment, we are at the step 8, drafting the constitution for the transition period. So for this political roadmaps and then the way to Federal Democratic Union, my office and the Myanmar Campaign Network and also the International IDEA, we're going to we are going to host a hybrid seminar on coming Thursday, and the face-to-face will be in Old Parliament House in Canberra, and then, but you can also join via the online. So that for Federal Democracy Charter mentioned that to create the inclusive political space, that is NUCC, and then in which the member of NUCC and then NUG and CRPH, they're going to develop the various wide range of the approaches, the political, economic, social, foreign affairs, diplomacy, this sort of thing. And then in which approaches the NUG ministry have their own plans. So NUG Representative Office in Australia, I'm working under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also I do have to assist other ministry plans, especially Ministry of Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Management, Health Ministry, Education Ministry, and Ministry of Planning, Finance, and Investment. So our targeted goal is to eradicate the dictatorship in Myanmar and also to build the genuine Federal Democratic Union. So that is the mandates and duties of the NUG. So if you ask me what NUG Representative Office working in Myanmar, so I would like to say very short answer is I'm assisting NUG to achieve that goal, and then I work in the Australian context. So I would like to explain a little bit more about NUG's representation in Australia. So the first step is the awareness raising. So NUG office in Australia, working with various actors, including government and politicians, and regularly present about what is happening in Myanmar. And then one of the key targets is to present the 12-step political roadmaps. A second step is to get appreciation from the government and politician and Australian community as a whole, including academia, media, and the organization. So to get appreciation on the initiative of the CRPH, NUG, and UCC. With appreciation, I do seek support from Australia. So one of the NUG strategy is to cut arms supply to the SAC, for example, arms embargo. Second is to cut legitimacy. For example, currently, Myanmar community in Australia, they are running campaign public rallies to support Ambassador Chomotun credential to be able to retain in the United Nations for one more year. So this kind of activities to cutting the legitimacy of the military and also promoting our NUG legitimacy. And third strategy is to cut impunity. So not only this Myanmar Spring Revolution, Myanmar people suffer under the brutal military regime for several decades. So, but the criminals are still receiving the impunity. So this is enough, and then the time to get the proper judgment on for the crimes they committed. So ICJ is a international jurisdiction channel, but we also focus on the universal jurisdiction. So very fortunately, Australia is one of the few countries applying universal jurisdiction principle. So Myanmar community in Australia are working with me to accuse military junta, another principle of the universal jurisdiction here. Now also, fourth strategy is to cut revenue flow to the SAC. That is about imposing the targeted sanctions against the military junta, and also boycott on the military business and boycott on the military junta associates. So these are the things we'd like to get support from the Australia, not only the Australian government, but also Australia and non-governmental organizations and then other human rights organizations. The final step is to get recognition from Australia. So for this area, NUG Representative Office working to strengthen the engagement between the governments and the parliaments of the two countries, CRPH and Australian Parliament, NUG and Australian government. So these are one of the key areas NUG Office is working in Australia. So this is a very general presentation about what NUG Office working in Australia. So awareness raising, appreciation, support, and recognition. in terms of how NUG office work in Australia. So there is the office. Now we establish the office physically in Canberra, and also NUG office working with CRPs and NUG support groups in Australia. And another entity is Myanmar Campaign Network, which is established by INGO, labor unions, and then human rights organization. And also NUG office work with medias and also the academia. For example, Initiative for Peace Building based in the Melbourne University. This is just an example. So NUG office working with two entities, and then, for example, the Universal Jurisdiction and Credential Challenge Campaign. This kind of activity, NUG office work in collaboration with CRPs and NUG support groups across Australia. And then Myanmar Roadmaps to Federal Democracy Forum, which will be on Thursday this week at the Old Parliament House, with support of the International Ideas and organized by Myanmar Campaign Network. So this kind of forums, series or roundtable discussion, that NUG office working closely with the academia and then in the INGOs. For example, the imposing targeted session against military junta and then the recognition to NUG, CRPH. This is a common targeted goal, and then we work together, all these three entities. Some of the activities work under the NUG office. So within the NUG office, generally we have 4 sessions, 4 units. So political sessions working focus on the research. So for example, during the campaign period, so NUG office political session prepare the analytical paper and prediction about the Australian federal election campaign, and then the potential consequences that can impact on the Myanmar Spring Revolution. And also the education and culture, I would like to highlight on the education section. So education sections are helping National Unity Government, Ministry of Education, and then its university like Spring University to facilitate and then get engagement with the Australian University. For the moment, National Spring University is in discussion with the ANU, some academics, and also the Myanmar YTU Yangon Technical University is also approaching some universities in Australia to get a collaborative program. And also we do have an idea to approach some Australian university to reinitiate Open University Australia. So that have been in 1990s, and then it was a very successful program. So NUG office is helping Ministry of Education and NUG to be able to set up this kind of program. And counselor sessions, I have a very efficient and very effective committed volunteers, and he is helping me to sort out the visa issue of the Myanmar citizen in Australia. And that secretariat is overall management of the admin and finance, and in addition to the newsletter, which is prepared and published by NUG office on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So these are the things NUG office working in Australia. In terms of measuring achievement, so I do have a process indicators and also as well as outcomes indicators. In terms of process indicator, the engagement between two countries is one of the process indicators. In terms of frequency, types of engagement, and sectoral engagement, these are the things we look and measure our progress. So after establishment of the NUG office in Canberra, the engagement between two countries is significantly increased. Not only the politicians and then the local NGOs, but also UN agency and then the other politicians from the other countries. So, and then another process indicator is champions. So champions in the parliamentarians, in parliament, champions in the organization, champions among the Myanmar diaspora community. So NUG office working with various organizations, as I presented in the previous slides, and then the encourage, and then the work with the champions to get more support from the Australian context, and also media coverage. So my office conducted a media frequency analysis, and then Myanmar news reached 170, 180 frequency in at the time of military coup, and then that frequency dropped down to 20 to 25 in average every month. So from February 2021 to date, there are only 3 peaks during the 18 months. The first peak was in June last year. It is because of the 5-point consensus, ASEAN 5-point consensus. And second peak was in last year, October. It is related to Tandalan affair in Kachin State. So military junta banned out the whole city in Kachin State. And then that's got a lot of media coverage. Then at that time, the media coverage was in the annual of the military coup to this year, February. And then the fourth peak is in last June and July. It is related to killing Kojimi, and then also putting Aung San Suu Kyi into jail and this sort of thing. So there are only 4 times peak during the 18 months. So that is why the NUG office set up a media support team and then assist Australian reporters and journalists to be able to reach out to the primary sources. So outcome, in terms of outcomes indicators, so support to would like to support to of the trust roadmaps. And then second outcome is funding via the NUG agency. And then the third outcome indicator, so number of education programs in collaboration for the civilian students in Myanmar, including the Pora students living in Pora area. So these are the outcome indicators to measure our efforts for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Your voice broke up a little bit towards the end, but that's okay. People may have questions for you, but it was a very good presentation indeed. Thank you. And I must say that it's wonderful seeing you representing NUG as effectively as you do. I think they made a very good choice back at NUG when they selected you to be the head of the office. And what you've seen since you came into the job has been obtaining premises in Canberra, setting up the office, having the launch party on the 3rd of August, which I had the honor to be at, and which had a lot of people there, and from all the main political parties in Australia, and also from some of the independents in the parliament. So it's very well appreciated across the political spectrum. What we now have to do, working with you, and this is what AMA will try to do, is to bring that into a reality in terms of support for the objectives that you have, and then to consider what might be done elsewhere in the country to support those objectives. Having it in Canberra, the office in Canberra, is very important. I mean, you have an extensive background in Australia. You have also background at the School of Public Health at the University of New South Wales, and work that's been done from there in Myanmar. And so you know the way the 2 countries work together better than probably anybody these days, and that's wonderful. But in Canberra, you can link up with the people who actually drive the nation. And so I think it's very good that you're able to have this event at the Old Parliament House this week. If you can put the link to that into the chat room for this event, that will be good, because then everybody who's here will be able to know what you're talking about and make the link themselves if they have time to drop in on the event. Would that be possible?
Yes, sure.
Okay, that'd be great, because I think it'll be very good to see that happening. And I think it's wonderful that you're able to do it at the old Parliament House. If you did it in some hotel ballroom, that would be much less effective. But doing it in the old Parliament House gives it a certain status, and that's very good for everybody concerned with Myanmar's future. The office, of course, as you describe it, will work with both the government, that's the executive government, and the Parliament. And both those elements of Australia's governance are important to the work you do. I think that the work you're going to be doing with the Parliament will be more important in a way than what you're able to do in bits and pieces with the people in government, because you'll be able through the Parliament to lay down a long-term plan for the achievement of the objectives that you've outlined. And you have a lot of supporters in the Parliament. What we want these supporters to do is to rearrange themselves now that there's been an election and now that a new government has been formed, so that we're able to see the meeting or the bringing together of the parliamentary friends with the sort of strength that we had in the last Parliament. But it'll be a better directed strength, because it'll be able to work with a minister and a ministerial office and with the other ministers in the portfolio more effectively than was possible in the last Parliament. And that would be very good. It'd be nice to know, and perhaps there'll be a question on this later, how you see similar activities in other countries. Are NUG officers in other countries doing the same sorts of things as you? And do they have representation with parliaments as well as governments in the other countries? And what are you able to learn from each other in the different NUG offices? That would be very good to know. I mentioned the parliamentary friends. There were some notable people who led the last parliamentary friends, but the ones from the Labour Party have generally graduated to more important formal positions in the Parliament, and they may be hard to get into the same leadership roles as they had before. We also haven't seen yet the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade meet and set an agenda which will take up Myanmar with energy, and we need to see that too. So one of the things that we in AMI would like to see is the Joint Standing Committee, and I think the chair of that is a parliamentarian called Shane Newman, decide that that's something they need to do to prioritise Myanmar for the period ahead. And then there are subcommittees on foreign affairs, on human rights, and some other issues. We would like to see each of them also take on board Myanmar as a priority issue within their own areas of action. That will come from the formal committees of the Parliament, but we need the parliamentary friends to move behind these formal committees and make sure that they do their work effectively. So we need to learn more about who's going to be in these committees and what they plan to do with their set of responsibilities. And we in AMI have had some meetings with members of Parliament, and John Brukel, who I think is here, has been very good in terms of setting up those kinds of meetings and appointments, and he's got some more in mind in the time ahead. But it's hard to do it, and because the parliamentarians move between their constituencies and Canberra. But after this budget session, they will be back to their constituencies again, and we will go looking for them and hunting. Now, Janelle is a member of the New South Wales Parliament. There's another member of the New South Wales Parliament called Jamie Parker, who's from the Green Party, who's a very active proponent of Myanmar issues in that Parliament and among the people in the New South Wales diaspora community. He was going to be here with us tonight too, but he can't be, again, for parliamentary duty responsibilities, and he sends his very best wishes to everybody who's here. But in New South Wales, they plan to do more than they have in the past. They haven't been able to get the same amount of organisation into their work in New South Wales as the Victorian parliamentarians have. And that's possibly because there's such an active and strong presence in the Parliament from a couple of members here who then bring the others along. And they have events quite frequently in the Victorian Parliament, but they too have yet to produce anything resembling outcomes. What I would like to see us do with you as the head of the office is consider what could be done usefully at the state parliament level. And that's for a couple of reasons. One of them is that the state parliaments are the ones that have a particular part to play in explaining to Australian official representatives from the Foreign Affairs Department the way federalism works in Australia, and see whether the Australian experience in federalism can help you at all with looking at what needs to be taken into account in the future of Myanmar's own federal system. Myanmar has done a very poor job since before independence at working out what federalism might mean. And I think we would all agree that the future Myanmar and the new constitution that you're drafting will need to have a good, strong and well-accepted federal base across the country if it's going to be successful. And that'll be important for lots of reasons, but not least, of course, because of the way ethnicity has been at the root of a lot of the difficulties that Myanmar's federal structures have faced in the past. We have said a few times that a thing that Australia has done quite well is to develop a policy on multiculturalism, which means that your own ethnic background is not that relevant to what you need to be an effective member of Australian society, both political, economic, cultural, and everything else. And one of the difficulties with Myanmar is that the country has to grapple with something left behind by the British, called the idea that you can rule the country by dividing it into nationalities. And so the famous, so-called famous 135 nationalities have been a bugbear for all people in Myanmar looking at how to create a coherent country for the long term. So our efforts on multiculturalism are possibly something that we can take forward with you to help you in your work with the NUG in developing this constitutional future for the country. And I'd like to see us do that, but to be effective in doing it, we need some help and support from the states. And so that's why the state parliaments, and the one in Victoria is a good example, are very useful for developing this kind of thinking. It also means that they can think of doing something which is actually relevant. So instead of just beating a drum and saying doye, doye, they can actually do something useful. And I think that the state parliamentarians definitely feel that as they go forward. The state parliaments, and Lisa may want to cover these things later, are also more attentive than the federal parliament to issues concerning youth. And so looking at the way the state parliaments consider youth issues might be more useful than talking to federal parliamentarians about youth. Youth are, for many people in federal parliament, a name to which you give money. But you don't really develop serious policy towards youth unless you think that youth is all about going along and cheering at a football game. It's more than that. And at the state parliamentary and governance level, they understand these things. So I'd like to see your office able to think about what you would like us to do through AMI, through our contacts across the country, to support those kinds of objectives. And so I'll be very interested to hear what Lisa comes up with when her time comes. I'm going to run out of time if I keep talking, so I'll just say a couple of things fairly quickly. We work very well with the diaspora, and it impresses me very much that as we go to diaspora rallies, and I went to one today in Melbourne, I saw the people there with their CRPH NUG stickers speaking about the importance of Myanmar. And they did this on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House. Never mind that the Parliament wasn't sitting and there was hardly anybody there. It was still good to see them there, and they take their message out to the passing public, and the Australian public seemed to respond quite well to the idea that Myanmar people are there talking about democracy for their country. And so I'd like to try to see how that works in the future with the diaspora. And I also recognize that in the time I've been with AMI, we've seen the diaspora come together in ways that weren't there when I came back to Australia in 2010. Now they're all together, people from all the different diaspora generations. And as you would know well, there are big differences in the viewpoints of people who came here after independence, after 62, after 74, after 77, after 88, after 96, and et cetera, differences of all sorts have been brought together, and so have the ethnicities. When I came back in 2010, it was very difficult to imagine that an event would have included people from the Rohingya community. Now the Rohingya community and the rest of the Myanmar diaspora mixes together understanding that they're all from the same country. And that's something we really have to push. And that's also something which works well when you explain it to members of parliament and people in government here in Australia. If they see that the diaspora is united in its representation of all these different aspects of Myanmar, they react very well to that. Mentioning youth is also an education. You mentioned education, and you mentioned also your consular activities. Visas remain an action for us, and certainly for NUG, and you know that very well. What we haven't yet been able successfully to do is to print that onto the minds of people in the Australian government. You get people in the Foreign Affairs Department who say, oh, that's okay, that's not us, that's the Immigration Department. And I say, you are the Foreign Affairs Department. Your people overseas represent the whole of Australia. It doesn't matter what the different ministries are. You're all concerned about the visa question. And so we would like to make sure that as governments work out all by themselves that they can deliver visas of any kind, basically on request to Ukrainians, there's no reason why they can't do the same thing for people who are coming here from Myanmar from just the same sort of dreadful atrocity circumstance. So I think that what you're doing is wonderful, and I look forward very much to AMI being able to help you. I also look forward to seeing what we can do at the different state levels to take things forward. I'd like to see us in AMI work out a way of using AMI resources across the country to make contact with the diaspora in those other places. And I need to speak at some useful time to the people in the diaspora here to understand how the NUG, the CRPH NUG is organized across the country. And I need to learn more from you, Tun, as time goes along, about the nature of the relationship that you have with the CRPH NUG in these different states and territories. And if we do all this well, and especially considering that we're doing it at a time when day by day the atrocity reports multiply from Myanmar, but with that we see a multiplication of stories about the weakness of the SAC in Minang Lang. It's a weak government, a government that has, or administration, an administration that has to kill its own people to get obedience has to be seen as weak. And as they weaken, the time draws closer when the rest of us in the outside world will need to be able to see the NUG as ready to govern. And a lot of the things that are on your map, your roadmap, are about being ready to govern. So I hope that that's something you'll be able to put forward effectively, not just in the media, but also to people in the Australian government and through them to people in other governments. I'd like to see more contact evident between the Australian government and the ASEAN governments who share this view. And Malaysia is a good example of one with whom we need to be in lots of contact. And as that goes on, the Foreign Affairs Department needs to think, in my view, about how best it can support you in the work that you're doing. I don't think this is the right place to discuss financial support for you, but I'd like to put that on the table as one of the things that we need to follow up on. But thank you to everybody, and I give your best, I give Janelle's best wishes to you all, and I hope that she approves of what I've said.
Thank you, Chris.
And so now we move to Lisa.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. My name is Lisa. I'm an activist specializing in women and youth rights and development, and also the co-founder of the activist youth group in Victoria called Victorian Myanmar Youth. Today, I would like to talk about how NUG representation in Australia is important for youth participation and development. There are three key areas that I would like to highlight. The first step is the basic one, and it's the capacity building. So we need to build a strong foundation for youth in terms of structure, competencies, knowledge and learning, and leadership. We also need to organize capacity building programs in collaboration with academics and institutes. For example, I attended the diplomacy training program organized by the UNSW, and other programs like lobbying, public speaking, media coverage, event or project management, something like that, something very useful for youth to, and also for the political movements that we are doing. And the second step after the capacity building, okay, we need to build the basic capacity building, and then we also need the support and the promotion, like we expect, and then we would like to request NUG office to support and promote ideas and creations of youth through the promotion of structured dialogue or a knowledge sharing section among people already involved in the movement. We were planning to do some kind of like generation of voices program that the Victorian Myanmar Youth has been organizing. And then so that kind of program can improve volunteer participation from youth and also increase the turnout and involvement from all youth, including the ethnic youth group and everyone, every youth in Australia. And this will also increase the political promotions and also encourage the media coverage, how youth participate in this political movement and then in Spring Revolution. And we also need mentoring program, like knowledge sharing webinars and talks for youth in both in Australia and also as well as in Myanmar. This kind of program, we need a lot of this kind of program for the youth in Myanmar as well. So for example, like the youth group in Australia, like us, we can mentor the youth in Myanmar, and we can also share our knowledge and experiences, like overseas students, how we are tackling the challenges or how we are facing like challenges or difficulties. So we can share the kind of knowledge. And we would also like to, we need the platform to discuss and exchange the creative ideas on a peer-to-peer level. For example, like youth living in overseas like us can share our experience to youth in Myanmar through International Youth Alliance Network. So we can involve and participate in that kind of network, and then we can share our, as a platform, we can use that platform to share our experience to each other and also share the ideas, how we tackle challenges. And also youth in Myanmar also, they can share their knowledge that how they tackle the changes and challenges and some kind of challenges that they are facing. And then we can also provide the knowledge about the digital and virtual solutions that we are learning, because now is the digital era. So we have to develop the digital skill for the youth in Myanmar. So for example, like I had involved in the youth bar camp before. So we need to host that kind of youth bar camp, something like that. It's like a space to share ideas and experiences and learn in an open environment through discussions, demonstrations, and interactions with the attendees. So this kind of program increases networking among young people and sharing best practices, and also offering young people funded opportunities as well as job opportunities. So those kind of bar camp, some of the investor may come, or youth can present their ideas, creativities, and so they can have like funding opportunities or job opportunities. So the last thing I would like to highlight, but not the least, is how to drive passion-oriented commitment from youth. So because there are big gaps between generations, like Chris said before, and we need to fill that gap and promote youth voices. We need to promote youth voices more than ever, because sometimes there are different things, like you are actively engaged, or you are not actively engaged, but you are told to do something. So it's not like you are doing with your passion. It's like transactional, more like transactional oriented participation, that you are doing this because you are asked to do, and then it's not about the passion. So we are trying to promote the active engagement of the youth, and also it will make less quiet quitting, because it's like nowadays, like a lot of people, if they are not passionate about something, they don't, it's not like they don't do, but they are just like doing less than that. And then rather doing like passionately, they are just doing what the minimum they are required to do. So we call it quiet quitting. And then so it will make us more actively engaged. And then yeah, so that's the 3 key areas that I think that we have the priority to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That's really good.
Thank you, Lisa.
So now we haven't got as much time as I thought we would have for questions and answers, but that's probably because I spoke for too long. We have a few questions. Chair, can we go back to the main screen, please?
Lisa will do it very soon.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So looking at the questions that we have so far, there's a question about blocked funds. This is an issue that starts in the United States, where there are a lot of Myanmar funds which are blocked. I don't think, David Kamaru, that there are those same blocked funds in Australia. But Tun, has that been something that's come to your attention, the issue of Myanmar funds in Australia?
Sorry, Chris, Myanmar funds?
Yeah, in the United States, there is a lot of Myanmar money banked by the government, which has been frozen after the military takeover.
Oh, yes, yes.
And the question is whether that can be released to the NUG. But I don't think there are the same sorts of funds in Australia, but you could correct me.
Yeah, so since military coup happened, hold the $1 billion in its central bank, the NUG is now government to get the 1 billion for the NUG is a legitimate government. Sorry?
Your voice is cutting.
Your voice is not good. I think we'll put a question to Lisa. If you don't mind logging out and logging back in again, that if my experience is the same, that will fix it for you, unless you've got something that you can do there. And if not, Lisa, what sort of arrangements do you have, and do the Myanmar youth in Australia have, for contact with the NUG office? And are you contacted at all by people in state or federal government in Australia about the views of youth?
Yes, last time I went to Parliament with Dr. Tun, and then I represented as youth leaders, and then we discussed about the youth issues. Like at that time, I just presented the youth issues like passport or visa expiry issue. So we have connection with Dr. Tun's office, NUG office, and not only the student issues, but also like me and Dr. Tun were discuss about how we are going to build the capacity for youth. For example, like if we are going to organize a seminar or a webinar or a talk for youth in Myanmar. Dr. Tun said the office can arrange, like he can find the speakers or from the academic or relevant speaker for us. So that kind of relationship we have with youth and the office.
Thank you. That raises a question for Tun then. When people want to put something on from the diaspora, put on an event, are you able to help them get charity rates when they make bookings or any of those sorts of things if necessary? I guess that when you put a thing on in the old Parliament House, you don't have to pay for it, or do you?
For this federalism events at the old Parliament House, it is fully funded by International IDEA.
Ah, okay, right. Now, occasionally we hear the diaspora groups want to book premises for events they want to hold, and I haven't been able to help them at all, but I don't know whether you have any pull with that kind of thing, or it might just be too much for you to think about.
Yeah, for the moment, it is still out of my scope. So for example, my office is running under the public funding. So I do not have any financial capacity to support this kind of one. So yeah, I have to rely on the Myanmar diaspora community, and diaspora community need to find funding to run this kind of events.
Okay. Well, another question that came in concerns the issue of the NUG's capacity to govern. Are you able to say a little bit more about that? It's on your map, and there was a question that came in, again from David Cameron, referring us to the article in The Diplomat by Philip Annawit about the NUG's capacity being ready to govern. What can you say about that? Because people say to us, oh, NUG, but they're out in the jungle or scattered around. They're not really a government. They're a collection of ideas. Can you give us a bit more confidence on that? Yeah,
sure. So the articles in The Diplomat mention NUG is ready to govern the country. And then the author asks international communities and government whether they are ready to recognize NUG. So it is very true, because Myanmar Special Advisory Council for Myanmar, the Christodorian team, they published a briefing paper a few weeks ago, and it's highlighted the position, territorial control and position of the different actors in Myanmar, especially the SAC, military junta, and then the NUG and its associated allies, the ethnic organization. So for the moment, the 70 townships out of 330 townships in Myanmar are under control of SAC. The SAC is able to control 100%. And then the rest of the townships, there is about 260. These are under the various situations. Some townships are under control of NUG and its PDF. So there are a total of the 6 townships. And then the 40 townships, it nearly 90% is under control of NUG and its PDF, especially in Sakai and Magui region. And also some townships are already controlled by ethnic arms organization who signs the ceasefire agreements. For example, Arakan Army, War State Army, this sort of ceasefire organization. So that reports clearly highlight that the SAC has deteriorating its position and losing the ground control. That is why the SAC trying to use its air power to attack the PDF and Myanmar resistant forces, because they are losing the ground control. And then that is why they are relying on the air power. So that's one of the evidence. And yes, also because of the control area, now as NUG government is, especially Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, they are very busy with installing the education system and then the health facility in the control area. So mobile clinic, setting up the mobile clinic, and also the station hospitals, and also the reopening the schools, and then commencing the education for the students in the control area. So you can see this sort of news in NUG website and also the Facebook.
Okay. Thank you. There's also a question, well, a notation actually in the chat room, Lisa, about you and other young Myanmar women meeting with the Foreign Affairs Department on issues to do with women in Myanmar. Is that something that you do because they contact you, or is that done through the NUG? What's the relationship that you have with NUG on these sorts of contacts with Foreign Affairs?
That one, because I was speaking in the Women, Peace and Security Dialogue for Myanmar, and then also it's with DFED, and then it was I was called, I represented as Women Activist Myanmar, because I'm also the member of Women Activist Myanmar, and also I'm helping the NUG Ministry of Women, Youth and Children Affairs. So in that context, I have involved in that DFED seminar meeting.
Thank you. And Tun, back to you again. Federalism. After all the things I said about federalism, what have you got to say about the likely realities of federalism in Myanmar? How do you think it's going to really be set up? Will they stick on the boundaries that were set by Ne Win, or is there a plan even to look at the whole shape of what federal Myanmar might look like?
Yeah, so thank you, Chris. This is a very important question. As you all know, Myanmar is under the third round of the military dictatorship cycle. So first cycle started in 1962, and the second in 1988, and then this one is third cycle. So in 1962 military coup, Ne Win was able to control the country very easily. And then in 1988, it was difficult, but Tun Shwe and his regime able to control eventually. But this time is quite different. So the reason is people in Myanmar, they got to know about the militarism, and they are well on the people. And then they all know that the common enemy of the country is the military. And then that is why the federalism is now comes into on the agenda of the to resolve the situation that over 70-year-long internal armed conflict. So if you look at the Myanmar social cohesion landscape, the Myanmar is under protracted social conflict for several decades. Even if you listen the narrative in this conflict context, you can hear about the narrative originated in the Burmese kingdom, and also during the colonial era, and also the Second World War. So many incidents happen along the history of Myanmar, and then all these things are rooted in the Myanmar cultural. So I would like to see the cultural conflicts in Myanmar. But these days, people are unite together, understand each other, and also the empathy is happening in the people in Myanmar. They now understand. For example, previously the ethnic organization think that Myanmar is a Myanmar nationalists treating them ethnic minority unfairly. But nowadays they understand that military treating unfairly to the people, and then they are just a super layer social class. So now people in Myanmar now understand who is the common enemy, what's the root cause of the conflict, and then the social cohesion landscape in Myanmar is changing a lot and positively. So that is why the NUCC is very inclusive, and then in this body, the leaders from the different sectors, they are discussing about federalism and democracy. And then if you look at the 12-step roadmaps, and also the foundation of the NUG government, the Federal Democratic Charter, that charter is based on the draft constitution drafted by Federal Democracy Constitution Drafting and Coordination Committee, which was the parallel process with the military junta 2008 constitution. So that constitutional drafting process started in 1990 and then finished in 2008. The same like the military junta constitution, 2008 constitution. So I would like to say this revolution, the Myanmar Spring Revolution, is not a standalone one. It's following the legacy of the previous revolution. So for example, that FDTCC Federal Constitution draft. So now the leaders in Myanmar Spring Revolution, they are talking and discussing in the NUCC, which is a new political space, very inclusive. And then based on the draft, they are now preparing the constitution for the transitional period. So from my point of view, I am really positive, very pragmatic on the situation in Myanmar. And then that 12-step roadmap is a one and only solution to end the 70 years long internal conflicts. And then they're looking forward to the genuine Federal Democratic Union of Myanmar, which is the dream of the people in Myanmar.
Thank you. What you said and about networks as well, and Lisa also referred to digital capacity in the country. One of the things that surprised a lot of people outside Myanmar was about the way the people in Myanmar were able to stick together despite the military assault on all forms of communication between them. And they're able to work out how to use their smartphones without the internet, for example. But that's something which is getting more and more difficult as the administration, the military, cut out the network providers one by one. There's almost nothing left in that sense. One of the questions that's come in asks whether NUG is in touch with Elon Musk to see whether he can make available Starlink to the liberated areas in the same way as he's done in Ukraine. Is that something that you're aware, you know anything about?
Yeah, of course. So when Myanmar people and also the NUG leaders, they heard about the Starlink when the Ukrainian crisis happened. The Myanmar leaders, including the NUG leaders and some talented professionals, they approached for the Starlink facility, but unfortunately, it's not possible in Myanmar setting because of the infrastructure.
Okay, well, we'll have to think about what else can be done about those sorts of things in that sense. There was a question that came in asking whether there's been any whether there's any plan for Australia to provide training and arms in to the PDF. I think the answer to that is no, but you might know more about that too.
Yeah, that needs a lot of policy shift in Australian context. So for the moment, Australian government policy to Myanmar is focusing on the humanitarian assistance alone, not health, not education, just focusing on the humanitarian assistance. So the military support is quite beyond the scope of the quite far from the current scope of policy.
Okay, one of our experiences with foreign affairs on the humanitarian policy is it's been hard to get them to move far away from where they were under the previous government. They're willing to make quite significant contributions to Myanmar, but they won't do it in ways that we think actually reach communities. They'll do it through the big organizations, through UNICEF or UNHCR, or maybe the big international NGOs, but to try and do it in a way that actually leads people, leads money and supplies out to the villages seems very difficult. Are you talking to DFAT a lot about that kind of thing?
Yes, of course. So for the moment, Australia foreign affairs policy on Myanmar, not only the humanitarian assistance, but also multilateral approach. So foreign DFAT focus on the multilateral approach, not bilateral. That is why it is a huge limitation for NUG to assess Australian government support in bilateral channel. In terms of multilateral approach, yeah, as you said, Australian government provide funding to UN agency and ASEAN through the multilateral, including the the big NGOs. So regarding UN agency like UNICEF, WHO, delivering programs in Myanmar, they are also facing a lot of limitations. They are just following the instruction from the military junta in terms of geographical coverage, in terms of delivery mechanism to those in need, limited by the SAC. So that is why I consistently advocate Australian government, not only Australian government, but also UN governing agency. So the reason is I compare the situation between Myanmar and Syria context. In Syria, UN agencies are able to work on both sides, President Assad and also the opposition side. They can work both sides because UN Secretary Council have a resolution on UN agency to be able to work both sides. And then that resolution allows UN agency to do their cross-border assistance. So for example, UNHCR in India can work in Myanmar through India-Burma border and provide assistance to the Kachin State or northern part of the Kachin State. So that's just an example. But in Myanmar context, there is no such kind of resolution from UNSC. So that is why Australian government, if they consider just multilateral approach and then they're able to provide support to UN agency, Australian government need to consider to approach governing body of the United Nations to be able to deliver or set up a similar resolution for Myanmar. Otherwise, the assistance will not be effective, will not reach to those in need. That's a point I consistently advocating to the DFED and then the politicians in Australia.
Thank you, Go.
Thank you very much. What we will do is to stay in touch with you, close touch with you, and see how we can help you in the future. And we will ask you to come back here next year, before this time next year, for an update on where things are. We would like you to be, if you don't mind doing it, to keep updating AMI on what you're doing, what you need, what's working, what's not working, how we can help you. That would be very good. And for Lisa, we want to know this about from youth as well. It's very important for us to know what youth are doing and what they want, what they need, what they're not getting, because we have said since the very beginning of this exercise when the military took over, in fact, we were saying it before the military took over, there needs to be much more focus on youth in Myanmar and how they can get their messages across, because after all, by the time we get through the backwash of what happened in military government over all these years, is today's young people of your age and younger, Lisa, who will be running the country, and we need to help them be ready to do that when the time comes. And so, Tun, next time I'll ask you how you're going with the integration of youth into your own governing structures. But meanwhile, I thank everybody very much for being with us. The next of our seminars will be on Monday, the 31st of October, and we'll give you information about that when we get closer to it. But I can see here today people who will speak very well at that event. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks for your offer.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for attending the
Thank
this
you.
evening's seminar.